Hi folks, Deacon Ed McCormick here on this beautiful fall day. And today I'd like to speak to you about the difference between the Holy Spirit and the toxic spirits that are at work in our society and in our culture and often in our relationships. And what inspires me to share this video is a reading we heard last Sunday, the second reading from St. Paul, his first letter to the Corinthians, where he reminds us that we are temples of the Holy Spirit because the Holy Spirit dwells in us, and therefore we are called to be holy in the way we live our lives, in our relationships. So this whole business of being temples of the Holy Spirit, of being holy, is crucial for understanding how to live as Christians today in our crazy world. Now, the first thing I want you to understand is that St. Paul here, when he says that you are the temple of the Holy Spirit, he's using the plural you. He's speaking to the whole Christian community, all the people in Corinth who are gathering in house churches. He's speaking to our little parish communities. He's speaking to our Christian friendships and relationships. He's not, first of all, speaking to us as individuals, but as Americans, our default thinking is always of the individual. Now, St. Paul's not dismissing the fact that the Holy Spirit dwells in each of us personally. His interest, though, is first that the community sees that it is indwelt by the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit is the atmospheric condition that allows Christian life to happen. The Holy Spirit is, first of all, the atmosphere within which Christians gather and within which sacraments and ministry and the word is proclaimed. And so I first want to stress that the idea that the Holy Spirit dwells in us is a communal idea. It's an interpersonal idea. And Paul is saying this to us in order to challenge us to live from the Holy Spirit, to live out of the Holy Spirit. Now, what's crucial is that we don't make ourselves holy. Do not confuse piety with holiness. We often do that. Piety involves all kinds of outward physical expressions and gestures that are meant to reflect an internal holiness. But being pious and being holy are not the same thing. You can be very pious and be a very cruel, mean person, not loving neighbor or God. So they're not the same thing. Nor can we make ourselves holy by going to church and praying. No, holiness is a gift that comes from the gift of the Spirit. Remember, it's Jesus appearing in the upper room and breathing on the disciples that fills them with the Holy Spirit. It's the outpouring of the Spirit promised by Ezekiel, the prophet, where God would take our stony hearts and give us new hearts and pour God's Spirit into us. So the Holy Spirit is a gift that's given to us. What we do is respond to that gift. We don't make ourselves holy. We become holy by responding to the gift that's already given to us. Now, another important point here. The Holy Spirit is given to us through Christ, and it's poured out into our world, into a world that is cruel and mean, into a world in which there are all kinds of toxic spirits that are opposed to the Holy Spirit. And so when Jesus breathes on the disciples the Holy Spirit, he's breathing onto them the Spirit of God, the Spirit of heaven, into a world that has just killed him, into a world of violence and cruelty. And so I want to say a few words about the toxic spirits that abound in our world, in our culture and society and relationships. And I'm going into this because in order for us to say yes to the Holy Spirit, we have to be aware of the many toxic spirits, anti-gospel forces that we can get caught up in and cooperate with, and we have to resist. So first of all, there are lots of toxic spirits, toxic movements within our culture and society today. Some of these should be obvious to anybody who follows Christ, but they would include any anti-black, anti-brown, racist, cultural and social attitudes and systems. This practice right now of ICE just picking up anybody who looks black or brown, who speaks Spanish, is a cooperation with this anti-gospel toxic force. Any system that is immediately condemning of a person and not respecting them as a human being, whether they are gay or straight, whether they are here legally or illegally, is a toxic spirit. The spirit that undermines listening and hospitality and welcoming the stranger. That spirit that wants to condemn others. That spirit that undermines dialogue and encounter. That's a toxic spirit. It's not the spirit of the gospel. It's not the Holy Spirit. And those spirits create systems and institutions that further this injustice and cruelty. So, my friends, we have to really be attentive to what are the social and cultural spirits at work in our day that are opposed to the gospel, and that we can easily, as a church, as a society, in our relationships and work, we can cooperate with. Furthermore, there are toxic spirits that infect our interpersonal life, our relationships, our internal life. These can be the spirit of greed and resentment and bitterness, jealousy, that spirit that moves us to compare ourselves to others. It can be that toxic spirit of insecurity or fear or rage, or that spirit within us that can condemn us, that inner critic who makes us insecure and fearful and therefore wants to judge others, wants to condemn others to make ourselves feel better. So we live in a world in which there are lots of toxic spirits that we have to resist, we have to grow free from, we have to become aware of. But the good news is that into that world, Jesus has breathed the Holy Spirit. It's like into our toxic air, he has breathed the fresh, divine, heavenly oxygen, and we're invited to breathe that in, to live from that. So where do we notice this? Where do we notice the Holy Spirit at work? This spirit of new life. Where do we notice it? I'm going to suggest 3 places. The first one is this. As I mentioned, the Holy Spirit is the atmospheric condition that allows breathing as a Christian to be possible. So you'll notice it in the preaching of the word and in our sacraments and in our ministry. I also want to suggest that you can notice the Holy Spirit at work in any prophetic movement that calls for justice and peace, that calls for the treatment of any person or persons with dignity. And so the civil rights movement, the movement to respect the LGBT community, the movement that respects women and children, that movement that called the church and all of society on account for the abuse of children, that whole sex abuse crisis and the confrontation that occurred, that's the movement of the Holy Spirit. The ecological movement, this call to care for the environment and to dismantle all kinds of political and technological systems that destroy our environment. These are all movements of the Holy Spirit. And finally, I encourage you to look within your own relationships, within your family and friends, within relationships within the community and work and ministry. And you will notice between you and others the Holy Spirit growing up the fruits of the Spirit. It will look like a spirit of compassion or peace or joy or gratitude, the capacity to forgive. And finally, the Holy Spirit often comes as a spirit that allows us to go free from those toxic spirits, where we are suddenly find ourselves freed from that resentment we held, freed from our grudges, freed from our bitterness. We're able to let go of fear, and suddenly we have a new capacity. Our hearts are bigger, our minds are more open. And finally, my friends, the good news of the Holy Spirit is that it ultimately makes us human. And that's why Jesus, who lived from the Holy Spirit, who was driven and guided by the Holy Spirit, is the human being, the fundamental human, who walks ahead of us and walks with us, calling us to become the new human beings that God desires us to be. See you in the next video.